Right. No further points of order. I now come to motion number 1 on sanctions. I call the Minister to move. Hamish Falconer, Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that the House has considered the Russia Sanctions EU Exit Amendment No. 3, Regulations 2024. This instrument amends the Russia Sanctions Regulations of 2019. The instrument was laid on the 30th of July, using powers provided by the Sanctions and Anti-Money Laundering Act 2018. It entered into force on the 31st of July. Mr. Speaker, for clarity, this instrument was first laid on the 24th of May under the previous government. This government supports the aims of this instrument, so we revoked and relayed it to provide additional time post-election for the required parliamentary scrutiny. There are no amendments to the policy in relation to Russia sanctions, and the substance of this instrument remains the same. The United Kingdom's commitment to Ukraine is ironclad. In July, the UK contributed £40 million to NATO's comprehensive assistance package for Ukraine, which ensures Ukraine will access vital assistance for counter-drone technology, demining of reclaimed land, and the medical rehabilitation of injured Ukrainian personnel. Ukraine has placed new orders for ammunition worth £300 million through the International Fund for Ukraine, which is administered by the UK. Sanctions, too, are a crucial tool to weaken Russia's ability to attack Ukraine. In July, the UK hosted the European Political Community at Blenheim Palace, where over 40 countries signed a call to action to tackle Russia's so-called shadow fleet, a fleet of ageing oil tankers which use deceptive shipping practices and substandard insurance to attempt to undermine sanctions on Russian oil. At the event, the UK spearheaded action against the shadow fleet when we sanctioned 11 oil tankers. Through this action, we continue to demonstrate the UK's steadfast commitment to Ukraine and to underline our leading role in eroding Russian oil revenues. Targeted sanctions against oil tankers have had a material and immediate impact. UK sanctioned tankers have been left idling, knocked out of the Russian oil trade, and for the most part, unable to load new cargoes. This instrument provides the basis for those sanctions and has enhanced the UK's ability to respond to Russia's increasingly desperate and reckless attempt to undermine ours and our partners' sanctions.
Mr. Speaker, can I thank the Minister and I welcome him to his place, and I hope wish him well in the role that he now plays. I've been sanctioned by China and Russia, along with many others in this House, and we understand those things, and it's almost a badge of courage, but that's not the issue. The issue I want to ask is this. My understanding of the sanctions is that businesses and those who have super yachts will be impacted directly by this. If that is the case, and that's all it means, can the Minister tell us, will he ensure that our sanctions have teeth enough to actually bite and to be painful?
I thank the honourable member. If you will, I'll go a little further into the introductory remarks, which I hope will specify why the measures we're tabling this afternoon will provide greater teeth and will answer your concerns. But if I don't, then I'll return. This instrument, as well as increasing the effect on shipping, also broadens the designation criteria under the Russia regime. It expands our powers to target those who provide financial or material support to Russia's war machine. This could include, for example, foreign financial institutions that facilitate significant transactions on behalf of or in support of Russia's military-industrial base. This is in line with steps taken by partners and the G7's commitment to curtail Russia's use of the international financial system to further its war in Ukraine. Let me now turn to the measure in the instrument that the member asks about. This instrument adds new relevant activities to the existing power in the Russia sanctions regime under Regulation 57, which provides the criteria to sanction individual ships called ship specification. The amendment provides a ship may be specified by the Secretary of State where there are reasonable grounds to suspect that the ship is, has been, or is likely to be used for any activity whose object or effect is to destabilise Ukraine or undermine or threaten the territorial integrity, sovereignty or independence of Ukraine, or to obtain a benefit from or support the government of Russia. This includes where a ship is involved in carrying dual-use or military goods, oil or oil products that originated in Russia, or any other goods or technology that could contribute to destabilising Ukraine, or undermining or threatening the territorial integrity, sovereignty, or independence of Ukraine. Where a ship is specified under Regulation 57F, it will be subject to measures in Regulations 57A to E, called the shipping sanctions. Where those sanctions apply, a specified ship is prohibited from entering a port in the UK, may be given a movement or a port entry direction, it can be detained or could be refused permission to register on the UK ship register, or indeed have its existing registration terminated. Additionally, UK persons and persons in the UK cannot provide funds and financial services, including maritime insurance, or brokering services in relation to specified ships that are transporting certain oil and oil products, and cannot use specified ships to supply or deliver Russian oil and oil products regardless of the price of the oil on board. Once again, the UK has already specified ships using this enhanced power. The previous government specified 6 vessels on June the 13th. This government specified 11 vessels in July, which were operating as part of Russia's shadow fleet. This fleet attempts to undercut our sanctions, undermines the maritime rules-based order, and presents an environmental and maritime security threat to coastal states. This statutory instrument also amends Regulation 6 in the Russia sanctions regime, which is the criteria for the designation of individuals or entities under the Russia regulations for the purpose of an asset freeze and other relevant measures. Specifically, the instrument adds additional activities for which a person may be designated, including where individuals or entities provide financial services or make available funds, economic resources, goods or technology to persons involved in obtaining a benefit from or supporting the government of Russia. In practice, this widens the set of actors and enablers that can be targeted for providing financial or material support to Russia and its war machine, as Putin continues to prosecute his illegal war in Ukraine. The instrument also consolidates powers under the Russia regulations to designate individuals or entities involved in the destabilisation of Ukraine. Specifically, the additional activities that the instrument adds to the designation criteria make possible the designation of persons who own or control entities involved in destabilising Ukraine, as well as individuals who work as directors or managers of such entities. In the plainest language, because that was the language that the Honourable Member used, this enables us to target the ship as well as the individuals or entities involved with the ship. We found through the previous regime that the ship itself is the sharpest area of vulnerability. So the IMO number of the ship itself is where these sanctions have greatest effect, and that is the effect we are using today.
Jim Shaw.
I understand the Minister has laid out the system very simply, and it applies to EU, but we all know that the person who seems to be breaking most of the rules is India and other countries across the world who are apt to buy Russian oil. If that is the case, how will these sanctions and what discussions has there been to ensure that India doesn't contravene what we are trying to do here ourselves?
Gently say to me, so we have only got an hour and a half, and I know you do want to speak, and I don't want to take any of that precious time away. Minister.
I defer to your good guidance, Mr. Speaker. To conclude, European security is a key focus of this government. Supporting Ukraine remains vital to this end, and the UK is committed to doing so. I'm sure in questions I'll have an opportunity to say a little bit more about how we work with our partners, including India, on these matters. We will work with international partners to ensure that the values of democracy, human rights and international law are maintained. This legislation and subsequent sanctions made under it show our commitment to Ukraine as they defend their freedom in the face of Russian aggression. British support remains ironclad. I commend the regulations to the House.
The question is, as on the order paper, I call Shadow Minister Alicia Kearns.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is the first time that I've appeared opposite the new Minister at the dispatch box, and I want to use this opportunity not only to congratulate him, but to welcome him to his place. In a previous life, we served together in the Foreign Office, and whilst he is free to disagree, although I would discourage him from doing so, I believe we worked well together in difficult conditions, and I hope that we will have the same relationship going forward. I'm confident that he will bring the same dedication from his work at the Foreign Office to his new position, although it is a difficult time to take responsibility for the Middle East and North Africa, and I know we all wish him genuine success in the role. Whilst the government may have changed, the commitment across this House to support Ukraine and starve the Russian war machine remains absolutely resolute. This motion demonstrates continuity of purpose, as it was originally laid by the Conservative government, interrupted by the election, and has now been retabled by the new minister. The Conservative government introduced the Sanctions and Anti-Money Laundering Act in 2018, allowing us to build our own sanctions regime, having left the European Union. Whilst our cooperative approach with the EU on sanctions is absolutely vital, particularly on Ukraine, this legislation laid the groundwork for the UK to create a world-leading and effective sanctions regime, as demonstrated after Putin's renewed illegal invasion of Ukraine and also concerns about the territorial sovereignty of Bosnia and Herzegovina. The UK has now sanctioned over 2,000 individuals and entities under the Russian regulations, with over 1,700 targeted since Putin launched his renewed and illegal invasion of Ukraine. Major progress has been made in cutting Russia off from global financial systems, restricting their military-industrial complex, reducing oil and gas revenues, and banning items with dual military use from export to Russia. Briefly, on behalf of my party, and some of them will be in the box today, I want to thank the countless civil servants, intelligence personnel and officials who work day in, day out to refine and improve our Russian sanctions regime. I know it is often difficult and hard work long into the night. We're extremely lucky in this country to be able to rely on some of the most intelligent and hard-working sanctions officials, and I'm sure the Minister has already seen just how effective they are, and of course he will have long-standing friendships with some. This particular motion addresses a key pillar of our sanctions regime, the identification and designation of Russian shipping, including ships operating under Russia's so-called shadow fleet. The success of our sanctions regime has forced Russia to resort to expensive and complex logistical measures to source sanctions goods and materials and export oil and gas, often via third countries, as raised by the Honourable Member for Stamford. As such, it is imperative that we target the maritime arteries feeding that Russian war machine, and we welcome that this motion will sanction a further 17 Russian vessels, including 15 from Russia's shadow fleet. It demonstrates that no matter how deep Russia sinks into the shadows, the UK and our partners will identify and act against Russian assets and their war machines. The broader changes to facilitate more effective targeting of Russian shipping and individuals aiding and abetting Russian aggression are also welcome. So the Minister has our full support for these changes. And our commitment to work collaboratively and in a spirit of cooperation with the Government on the continued development of our Russian sanctions regime will continue, because some things, rightly, are above politics. Now, two areas requiring attention, as I'm sure the Minister is aware, is the transfer of dual-use technology to Russia from China and the kidnapping of Ukrainian children, which some would say is a form of genocide. Whilst I understand he cannot comment on future sanctions, I would ask that he keeps all options open and commits to targeting any entity, individual state or organisation providing support for Russia's illegal and brutal war and the kidnapping of Ukrainian children. Maintaining an effective sanctions regime requires continuous attention and effort. This instrument is an important continuation of that work, and we support the Minister in bringing it to the House. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Gordon McKee.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I welcome the Minister's statement and to his position in the House. He brings a huge amount of experience in this field, and I know he'll do a fantastic job. Tightening economic sanctions on Russia is one of the most fundamental ways that we can help support the people of Ukraine in their fight for democracy. And it's that I want to speak about briefly this afternoon. Throughout history, conflict has been a battle of individual courage and morale, something that the people of Ukraine have demonstrated time and again over the last 2 years since the Russian invasion. But conflict is also, and has always been, a battle of technology. From Roman legions through to the Manhattan Project, the side with the better, more advanced technology often prevails. Which is why it is important that our sanctions don't just restrict the ability of Russia to resource their war, but the ability to fight it in the first place. And as the saying goes, chips are the new oil. Russian semiconductor technology remains around 15 years behind that of NATO allies, but through avoiding sanctions, they are able to overcome this problem. More than 2 years on from their illegal invasion, they remain able to acquire the microchips necessary for advanced missiles and drones, which are used against innocent civilians in Ukraine. Yet when our sanctions were first introduced, many remember, I certainly remember, there was talk that Russia's economy would come to a standstill, that within months planes wouldn't be able to take off and their military would be unable to function. Now, clearly, that has not happened. We must therefore ask ourselves why and what more we can do. Today's move to ban shadow tankers and to sanction those who are operating them is the right decision. It will impair Russia's ability to finance its war through selling and transporting oil. But there is still more to be done, much of which will require ingenuity and the kind of careful diplomacy that I know the Minister is more than capable of. There are two broad strands to the way in which Russia is obtaining this technology. The first, and perhaps most difficult to resolve, is through repurposing common technologies. I'm talking here about the kind of dual-use microchips that the Honourable Lady referred to. You get these in washing machines and microwaves, but they are appearing in Russian attack weaponry. The Orlan 10 drone, for example, used by Russia to target Ukrainian troops, contains some Western-made components you would normally find in weather stations or even in dishwashers. So, can I ask the Minister to reflect in his summing up on what work the government is doing to make sure that these dual-use microchips are unable to be used in this way? And the other way in which Putin's military has continued to supply itself is through avoiding sanctions via third parties. The evidence of this is widespread. Since the invasion of Ukraine, exports from the EU to some of the countries bordering Russia have increased by around 50%. It's roughly equivalent to 3/4 of the drop in European exports to Russia since the war began. It doesn't take a genius to work out what is going on, especially given that the biggest growth in exports is in heavily restricted product groups, things like chemicals, electronics and machinery. Now, I know the Minister will be keenly aware of this, so I wonder if he could inform the House of the diplomatic work the Foreign Office is undertaking to ensure that we combat this. Madam Deputy Speaker, I fully support the Government's move to tighten sanctions. Russia must never be allowed to prevail in Ukraine, and we must constrain their resources to fight this illegal war. The people of Ukraine have shown incredible bravery, courage and skill. The very least that we can do in this place is to honour our commitment to them. I know the Minister will do everything in his power to help achieve that. Thank you.
Lib Dem spokesperson Richard Foord.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Given that this change to the law seeks to tighten economic and trade restrictions on Russia, the Liberal Democrats support this statutory instrument that has been carried on from the work of the previous government. But if we step back from the detail of what this SI seeks to do, it's worth looking at some of the context in which this is happening. Proceeds from oil and gas sales for Russia's federal budget rose by 41% in the first half of 2024. That's partly accounted for by the fact that oil prices have gone up and the ruble has become weaker. But you can't get away from the fact that Russia is profiting from its oil and gas sales in a way that was not the case a year ago, and is getting far greater proceeds from the sale of its oil and gas. And this matters, of course, because it is using this money for its grossly illegal aggression in Ukraine. And it's thought that between a third and a half of the total Russian federal budget is accounted for by these oil and gas sales. So we have to ask the question, how is this happening? Yes, it is partly happening by Russian ships that are part of this so-called shadow fleet. And it's welcome to see that this SI will be prohibiting these ships from entering a port in the UK. It's welcome to see that they can be detained in the UK, or that they will be refused permission to appear on the UK's ship register. But the Honourable Member for Stamford is exactly right that we have also to think about what other countries are doing besides the UK. According to the Financial Times, the oil trade between India and Russia has almost doubled to $65 billion in 2023. India imported very little crude oil before the invasion of Ukraine and is now the number 2 importer of Russian oil after China. It's alleged that India has been refining Russian crude and re-exporting it to European nations that are otherwise seen as subject to and complying with our sanctions regime. It was interesting also to hear from the Honourable Member for Glasgow South about the use of dual-use technology. And it's true to say that Russia is seeking to become increasingly self-sufficient, while it also looks to China and India to import technology in the fields of AI, space technology and energy technology. We saw earlier this year that the former Russian Deputy Prime Minister, Andrei Belousov, who was previously the Minister for the Economy, has become the Principal Minister for Defence. And we need now to be moving to the next stage. When we think about dual-use goods, we need to be thinking about how we can make sure that we can throttle the Russian economy so that it does not find itself importing these goods that can be used for the aggression in Ukraine. Thank you.
Maiden speech, Josh Simons.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Now, I know that tradition dictates these speeches pay homage to our honourable predecessors, but I must say the history of maiden speeches delivered by members for Makerfield is somewhat checkered. My predecessor, Yvonne Favard, had to face down an unwelcome opponent, an unusually persistent wasp. Just as she stood up, after buzzing around her face, it struck, leaving her to struggle through the next few minutes while her face gradually swelled up. Before her, her predecessor, Ian McCartney, faced an even more formidable opponent, Michael Fabricant. I'm told that for decades, the parliamentary record of that encounter has stood uncorrected. As Mr McCartney began, Mr Fabricant put his feet up on the bench. Betty Boothroyd sat in your chair, Madam Deputy Speaker. Mr Fabricant interrupted with a point of order, not the done thing in maiden speeches, I'm told. Madam Speaker, he said, can you ask the man to speak in English? Mocking Mr McCartney's thick Scottish accent. Mr McCartney retorted, if he doesn't mention my accent, I won't mention his wig. The record does not then note Mr Fabricant's response, touché, touché, or Mr McCartney's victorious retort, toupee, toupee. Anyway, so far today, no wasps, and a point that may perhaps unite this House in gratitude, no Michael Fabricant. Madam Deputy Speaker, while I do not wish to emulate these misfortunes, I do hope to continue their good work delivering for the people of Makerfield. Many in this chamber may not know that Makerfield is not really a place. It's a suffix attached to a collection of towns given the name of an ancient Lancastrian forest called Makerfield that used to stretch unbroken from Wigan to Warrington. The towns I represent now include Hindley Green and Hindley, Plattbridge and Abram, Ashton and Bryn, Winstanley and Worsley Mains, Orrell and Pickley Green. The history of these towns is the history of our nation. Many dug pit mines, producing the coal that powered our industrial revolution. While men dug the coal, women sorted it, pitbrow lasses as they are known. Mine workers organised into unions and elected Labour MPs to represent them since 1906. Industrial decline then brought great destruction to many of these towns, places like Abram, Bryn, Bickershaw and Hindley, places that will never forget the callousness with which they were treated in these years. That's one reason why I support delivering justice to mine workers on the Mine Workers Pension Scheme. Coal made this nation wealthy, and now we must ensure these workers live with dignity in old age. Backed by a Labour government, Ian McCartney then delivered the minimum wage, new health hubs in Plattbridge and Worsley Mains, and investment in Abram and Winstanley. Then under the Tories, 14 years of austerity deepened the wounds of industrial decline, hollowing out public services and defiling public spaces while wealth accumulated in London and the South East. My predecessor, Yvonne Favard, worked hard to protect constituents, continuing a tradition of working closely with the fantastic Wigan Council on its groundbreaking Wigan deal. She delivered a new health centre in Ashton and was a leading voice in combating debt, loan sharks, and those who prey on the most financially vulnerable. Through these ups and downs, a history that is the history of our country, the towns I represent have developed one simple superpower: a community spirit that should be the envy of this land, a pride in place and a care for family, for friends, and for neighbours. Today, this spirit manifests in some of the wonderful community organisations I've had the privilege of getting to know. In Orrell, Tony and Julie and volunteers at Brighter Better Orrell, Friends of Orrell Station, Greenslake Community Farm and Greenslake Water Meadow. In Worsley Mains and Winstanley, Joe at St Jude's Rugby Club, Winstanley Warriors FC and Clifton Street Community Centre. In Ashton and Bryn, the Brian Baru Club and Garswood Hall Bowl, Ashton Town and Ashton Athletic FC, currently rebuilding after a mindless arson attack. In Abram and Platt Bridge, David's fantastic Wigan and Lee Community Charity and Wigan Cosmos FC. In Hindley, Eric at the Hindley Community Allotment and the Friends of Hindley Station and of Borsdane Woods. And in Hindley Green, the Brunswick Bowling Club, the St John's Church and Bethel Community Centre and the Hindley Green Residents Association. What then is the future for these towns and for our country? That is the question that we on these benches must now answer. The task is immense. People I represent have lost trust in politics and in politicians. They believe that the work we do here makes little difference to them. They feel we lecture, we speak, we let economists or lawyers or bankers tell us right answers, but that we do not listen, respect, or represent them. That is why the weight of responsibility on this government, on me as their representative, and on all of us across this House could not be greater. Together we must deliver for decent, fair-minded, hard-working people who love their community and their country, especially in the former industrial heartlands of our great nation, which I am so proud to represent. We cannot and we will not let these people down. In this House, I hope to use my career to contribute to this question of the future. I spent years working on technology, data and machine learning. Too often we talk about technology as an inexorable force, as if it bends society to its will. But it has no will. Technology is a tool. We build it, we design it, we use it in our world in ways that we choose, and that is why now, more than ever, we must have the interests of working people in mind as we harness the great potential of technology. I look forward to working with colleagues across this House who share these interests. But my family is what brings me more pride than anything. My parents divorced at a young age, so I grew up shifting between homes, between towns, and between religions. I learned to see the best in people and in ways of living that could not be more different. Now, I'm lucky enough to see the world through the eyes of my children. I remember friends asking me before our first child was born, "How do you feel about bringing a child into this grim world?" But to me, that has it all wrong. Children are a bridge to the future. They inject hope into what our communities and our country and into what we as individuals can be. That is why childcare will be a key focus of mine. We make having children too hard, too exhausting and too expensive in this country. Radically reforming childcare may be one of the most effective ways to deliver change that working people can feel, as well as boosting our workforce. And that's why I'll be campaigning hard for it over the coming months and years. Madam Deputy Speaker, let me end by returning to something my predecessor, Mr McCartney, said about the history and the future of the towns we represent. Democracy, he said, is not solely or even primarily about this place or about us. It is about the efforts and the endeavours of ordinary people. It endures because people have their country and their desire for freedom and for fairness in their hearts. This, I believe, is a profound lesson, a lesson that bears on this age even more than on his, one we must hold close through the challenges ahead, for we live in an age of insecurity. As the organisation I was proud to lead, Labour Together, has argued, we must once again focus on strength, security and working with allies to navigate the choppy waters ahead. And that's what we're here debating this afternoon, which is why I urge this House to support tightened sanctions on Russia. We must navigate the challenges of this age with a constant focus on working people who are the backbone of this country. Because unless working people, like those I'm so proud to represent, feel change, unless we in this chamber demonstrate humility and honesty and act with integrity and with respect, they've no reason to believe in democracy. That's the kind of representative for the people of Makerfield that I hope to be. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
SNP spokesperson Stephen Gethins.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I first of all, if I may, congratulate the new member for Makerfield on his extremely well-delivered maiden speech. I'm sure that he's somebody that we won't be able to ignore over the next few years. I think there's also something that he inevitably had somebody with a Scottish accent who followed that maiden speech as well, given his remarks. So I hope that everybody in the chamber will be able to follow this, unlike Michael Fabricant did in the past. Madam Deputy Speaker, I also think it's important to be speaking today, and can I join with colleagues in backing the government's move in terms of sanctions? I think the cross-party nature of support that the government has on this particular issue is exceptionally important. I do think we could be slightly more robust in this regard, and I'm going to have a number of very specific questions for the Minister in my speech today, and I know he won't be able to answer them all, but I would like to have them put on the record for him to answer in due course. First of all, I was very pleased to hear the Minister talk about European security. We are, of course, stronger when it comes to dealing with Russian aggression in Ukraine, when we do so in commonality with our partners in Europe. In that regard, I've been pleased to hear the Foreign Secretary talk about the importance of common European foreign and security policy. But that security also comes to issues like energy security, whereby being outside the single market makes us less secure. So what I'd like to hear from him is in which areas does he feel that he can deepen security with our European partners on the issue of sanctions, but also more broadly as well. Secondly, on tightening up of financial regulations. He'll be aware of the issue around shell companies. In the past, the former member for Kirkcaldy, Roger Mullen, had frequently raised the really important issue around, for example, Scottish limited partnerships. Now, I know this isn't something he'll be able to answer immediately in the chamber, but I'm wondering if this is something that you can look at in terms of the financial regulations and the challenges around dirty money, which all too often, as we know, and if we picked up on across this chamber, have found their way into the UK economy as well. So on that particular issue, I'd be grateful if he's able to look at that, though I acknowledge putting him on the spot right now might be a little bit unfair. I also want to pick up on the report by the Intelligence and Security Committee recommendations, and we know the issues. Yes, we're talking about sanctions, but the broader issue around polarisation and disinformation in our society. And in this regard, if I may, I want to pay tribute to the work of my predecessor, Stuart Hosey MP, who worked tirelessly on the Intelligence and Security Committee. I did colleagues from across this House on that particular issue. I've not had the opportunity to do so, and I hope Madam Deputy Speaker will forgive me, but I want to pay tribute to his House on these questions in Parliament, but also as an exceptionally diligent, hard-working and popular local MP. I hope you'll forgive me just for putting that on the record just now. Finally, and just to pick up on some of the points made by the member for Rutland and Stamford, I'd firstly like to pay tribute to the colleagues in the Minister's Department at the FCDO. I know they've been working on this issue exceptionally hard. I pay tribute also to the intelligence services and the work that they've done, often in very difficult circumstances. I think it would be remiss of us not to touch upon the exceptional work that's done by the international NGO community, many of them based in the United Kingdom, who have done incredibly brave work in the field on this issue. Some of the work that they've done has found its way into policy, others less so, but the international NGO community over the years has been exceptionally good and often ahead of the government of the day on some of these issues. The member for Rutland and Stamford picked up the issue of the kidnapping of children. I wholly endorse her remarks. The member for Glasgow South was quite right to pick up on technology and the secondary role of technology, and I'd endorse his remarks. And finally, when we're looking at sanctions, I'd ask him to look across a piece at the system of arms export controls when they go to secondary countries, and also I would hope, and I will write to him about this, I'll write to the Foreign Secretary about this, also making sure that we do not catch countries like Ukraine and impede their ability to defend their territorial integrity after Russia's aggression. But overall, I'd like to thank the Minister for his comments, and he'll have our support. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Maiden speech, Tim Roca.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I congratulate my honourable friend for Makerfield on his fantastic maiden speech? There's already a little bit of confusion between Macclesfield and Makerfield, and it's good that we can continue that by both giving our speeches on the same day. It is the privilege of my life to be elected to represent the communities of Macclesfield. Can I start, though, by placing on record, Madam Deputy Speaker, my thanks to the House staff for the warm welcome and support they've given new members in particular in the last few weeks. From the table office, the Speaker's office, the doorkeepers, our catering and security colleagues, they have all been phenomenal. So thank you so much. I understand just by speaking that I've already outdone one of my predecessors, as the library tells me that they're yet to find any evidence that a century ago William Brocklehurst said anything at all in the 12 years he represented Macclesfield. But on the subject of predecessors, I want to sincerely pay tribute to my immediate predecessor, David Rutland, particularly his public service on behalf of Macclesfield, but also for our country. If you speak to anybody of any political persuasion, they will tell you that he is a man of courtesy and of kindness, and that certainly tallies with my experience. Madam Deputy Speaker, you'll have noticed after the momentous general election that we had earlier in the summer that there are lots of bright new members frenetically trying to make a name for themselves. So I need something to help me out, to help stand out from this crowd of new MPs. And the House Library think they have found it. I may very well be the first Labour Member of Parliament to be called Tim. Now, growing up in the 1990s with Harry Enfield, being called Tim was a bit of a cross to bear, so it's good to see that it's finally paid off. And if being the first Tim isn't enough, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'll make do with being the first ever Labour Member of Parliament for Macclesfield. 75 years ago, my granddad crashed his car in Macclesfield, and it was whilst hospitalised that he fell in love with a young Irish nurse, my grandma, Josephine. And my family's story in Macclesfield began. I grew up in the constituency, and I'm proud to call it home. From the Cheshire Plain to the rolling hills of the Peak District, it is a beautiful part of our country. Indeed, nearly a third of the constituency lies within the Peak District National Park. The town itself was famously home to a thriving silk industry with 71 silk mills operating at one time, and I'm proud to be wearing a Macclesfield silk tie today, Madam Deputy Speaker. Macclesfield and its towns and villages, Disley, Poynton, Bollington, Prestbury and more, have made their contribution to our country with athletes, artists, scientists and writers of renown. And though the member for Salford can try and claim the band Joy Division, it's the mural of Macclesfield born and bred Ian Curtis that dominates our town, a reminder not only of his talent, but of the very real struggle many people face with mental health. Macclesfield also hosts a sprawling AstraZeneca campus that employs over 5,000 people, crucial not just to my constituency, Madam Deputy Speaker, but to the economy of our country. At the election, it was a privilege to campaign and, importantly, to listen to people's concerns, aspirations and fears. Many spoke of the climate emergency and the need for greater action. Others insisted on the need for electoral reform, a view that I share. But universally, they worried about public services and the cost of living crisis. The backdrop being a widening inequality on a scale that is Edwardian, unprecedented and, in my view, immoral. Madam Deputy Speaker, there is no doubt we live in interesting times. The last Parliament, yourself and colleagues, had to contend with a global pandemic, one that still casts its shadow across our country. But the world itself has a feeling of drifting towards the rapids. Every day, the brave men and women of Ukraine fight for the life of their country, and these coming weeks may prove critical in that war. In the Middle East, innocent civilians bear the brunt of a tragic conflict with a ceasefire frustratingly elusive. And across the world, economic shocks, climate extremes and soaring prices are combining to create a food crisis of unprecedented proportions. At home, confidence in our political system is at a record low. According to the latest British Social Attitudes Survey, as many as 58% say they almost never trust politicians to tell the truth. Now, in medieval times, parliaments had monikers. There was the mad parliament, the lawless parliament, the merciless parliament. How will we in this place be known as we face up to our responsibilities in this parliament? I look forward to working with members across this House to meet those responsibilities, to act for the public good, to contribute thoughtfully without fear or favour, to make this place of public service, not self-service, national interest, not self-interest, so that together, to borrow a phrase, we are a standing contradiction to people who wish to believe that only those with cold hearts and twisted tongues can succeed in the world of politics. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Maiden speech, Rupert Lowe.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Great Yarmouth is a constituency like no other. In many ways, it feels 2 or 3 decades behind the rest of the country. What may seem to be a criticism is, in fact, the complete opposite. Countless other areas who once shared Great Yarmouth's unique sense of community, not too long ago, have lost that. In Great Yarmouth, everybody knows everybody, and if they don't know somebody, they know somebody who does. It holds a remarkable charm, unlike that anywhere else that I've experienced. My constituents care about their town, they care about their community, and they care about their country. As Harry Redknapp would say, a proper place, Chairman. During the European Championships, I can honestly say that I have never seen so many England flags in my life than in Great Yarmouth. Certain honourable members from across the chamber may have found this experience to be a reminder of past indiscretions. As is customary, I'd like to thank my predecessor, Brandon Lewis, for his contribution to the Great Yarmouth constituency over 14 years. It's a genuine honour to represent the UK's premier seaside tourist destination, narrowly beating Clacton and Skegness to the top spot. A billing definitively decided by a straw poll of constituents on Great Yarmouth's famous Golden Mile. A particular fan of the attractions in the constituency was one Anne Widdicombe. Taking her on the world-famous Snails roller coaster during the election campaign was an experience she's unlikely to forget. Her back held up rather better on the rickety ups and downs than my own. We are blessed with some of the UK's most glorious coastline. Great Yarmouth, Caister, Galston, California, Hopton and more. As those who are familiar with the geology of the area will know, my constituency's borders change on an almost monthly basis as swathes of land are reclaimed by the sea, particularly in the charming village of Hemsby. Whilst other coastal communities have been rightly gifted the defences they desperately need, the good people of Hemsby have been left to fight the power of the sea. It's been a losing battle, and numerous constituents have lost their homes with zero compensation. In fact, one resident told me his property was worth minus £15,000 due to demolition costs. I pledged to fight for Hemsby, and that's exactly what I'm doing. The funding criteria, as promised by the now DEFRA Minister on an election visit to the area, must be urgently changed. We do not have time for the usual pontification. We must act before any more of my constituency disappears into the sea. I'm pleased to say that, amongst other things, I have already secured the reopening of the Hemsby Beach public loos. Decades ago, the ocean brought huge wealth to Great Yarmouth, both from fish and oil. Primarily known for its wildly successful herring fishing industry at its peak, it was one of the most important fishing ports in Europe, often referred to as the herring capital of the world. That wealth was stolen from the people of Great Yarmouth and transferred overseas through our membership of the EU. It is no surprise that my constituents overwhelmingly voted to leave the European Union. Evidently, a constituency with fine judgment. It is very sad that today, having been our largest fishing port, only one fishing boat operates from Great Yarmouth now, and there is no longer a local fish processing industry. Great Yarmouth's local football club is affectionately known as the Bloaters. The Wellesley ground contains the oldest wooden football stand in the world. I am now the proud holder of a season ticket, which was an incredibly kind gift from the club's chairman, following the donation of my first month's parliamentary salary to the club. Don't worry, it's been appropriately declared. A ticket perhaps of less financial value than some other members will have declared, but one which holds infinitely more real value for me. Being elected as Great Yarmouth's MP was the proudest moment of my professional life, narrowly beating taking Southampton to the FA Cup final in 2003 as chairman. Sadly, we lost that day 1-0 to Arsenal to a tidy Robert Pires finish. The town and its people have quite simply been let down and forgotten for too long, being at the end of the line, literally and metaphorically. My constituents look around their town and they've seen their once booming home change beyond recognition. Uncontrolled mass immigration has failed Great Yarmouth, as it has failed the entire country. Just like the majority of the rest of the country, in 2010 they voted for lower immigration. In 2015 they voted for lower immigration. In 2016 they voted for lower immigration. In 2019 they voted for lower immigration. What did the Conservatives do? Allowed immigration to soar with no thought to the brutal consequences. In 2024, Great Yarmouth also voted for lower immigration. The difference this time is that I voice those concerns and fight as best I can to drastically reduce the unsustainable number of people settling in our country. The roads are packed, the hospitals are full, GP surgeries are bursting at the seams, dentists are inaccessible, quite frankly the system is broken, and mass immigration is largely responsible. Great Yarmouth has a very long history of proudly welcoming immigrants who come to the UK in order to work hard, integrate properly, and contribute to the economy. The current chaos could not be further from that. We have local people, particularly women, feeling unsafe in their own town. We're told that crime is down, but I don't believe it, and the town certainly doesn't believe it. We must be clear, the reporting of crime is down because many have lost faith that the police will act. I am determined to change that, and I'm running a public awareness campaign on the importance of reporting crime, one which I think should be replicated nationally. Yes, of course we need more police on the streets, but without reporting crime, nothing will change. There's so much to resolve in Great Yarmouth, but treating the symptoms can only be a temporary measure until the root cause of the issue, uncontrolled immigration, is tackled in Westminster. Our whole system of governance is broken. I have huge respect for members of this House who have entered with genuine experience from a career in business, medicine, the military, or however else. Sadly, we're a dwindling number, and the relentless rise of the career politician continues. From PPE at Oxford, to special advisor, to parliamentary candidate, to MP. This well-trodden journey serves nobody but the traveller and deprives the British people of the representatives that they deserve. Many members of Parliament lack the experience of the challenges faced by people in the real economy. A day on my farm or some work experience in one of my contracting businesses would open their eyes to the punishing reality of what hard-working Brits go through every day, much of which emanates from do-gooding legislation. I fear that everybody in Britain won't understand the damaging reality of socialism until they've experienced it. The only difference between this government and the last is that they may be more honest about what they're intending to inflict upon the British people. The political system serves nobody but itself. It's arrogant, it's out of touch, and it's incompetent. That's a potent mix which has delivered woeful government after woeful government. Who suffers? Decent men and women working hard to provide for their families. We need to back the risk takers, back the wealth creators, back the doers. As the greatest Prime Minister in many decades correctly said, let's back the workers, not the shirkers. If we're going to successfully change Britain, we need to change politics. The election of 5 Reform Party MPs, including me, is a politically seismic event in our two-party state. We are just getting started, and the winds of change are blowing much harder. If I could just say, Madam Deputy Speaker, on Russia and the Ukrainian situation, I think it's a tragedy for both those countries. It's a tragedy for Europe, it's a tragedy for the world, and particularly it's a tragedy for those people who are needlessly dying on both sides. And with regard to what one of my colleagues said, I would very much like to echo the support and help which the staff of Parliament have given all of us new MPs. I wouldn't call myself a young MP, I'm actually a pensioner, but I would like to thank them all very much indeed. Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Minister.
I'd like to thank the House for their contributions in this debate. I would also particularly like to thank the member opposite for her kind words about my service in the Foreign Office and indeed pay tribute to hers. She did fine work on Iraq and Syria and I was glad to work with her. And I will look forward to working with all of this House on matters of national security. I'd also like to welcome the maiden speeches. Members from Makerfield and Macclesfield were both very funny, which is useful when I'm being so dour at the dispatch box. In relation to the member for Great Yarmouth, I noticed he paid tribute to particular kinds of experience, military, business people, but he did elide the diplomats. So given that there are many of them in the box, I would like to say he should take a look at the good work of the Foreign Office because there are many hard-working officers who do their very best, and I'm grateful to everybody in the House for recognising that. I will come back, if I may, to some of the points raised by the other parties, and I regret to the member for Arbroath that I may have to write to him about the specific Scottish issue. Let me first go to...
Please. Yeah, just on the issue of Scottish limited partnerships, and I'm grateful to the Minister for responding to me, saying he'll respond to me in writing, which I accept. I should also say, and this was a mistake that previous Prime Ministers made, Scottish limited partnerships are not a Scottish Parliament issue, but they are a Westminster reserved issue, just to be absolutely clear on that. Thank you.
Minister.
No, I understand that, and I agree. I would also like to welcome in your comments the importance you placed on working together. I indeed also believe that we're, in many of these issues, better together. In relation to the important points raised, there were some points made about both our partners in India and China in relation to Russia. I would say to the member opposite that any evidence of Chinese companies providing military support to Russia would be damaging for China's international reputation, given its strong position on not being involved in the conflict. And we will not hesitate to take action against anyone supplying and funding Putin's war machine. In relation to India, raised by the honourable member across the aisle, we regularly raise Russia's actions in Ukraine with India. We did so most recently during a conversation between the Foreign Secretary and the Indian Foreign Minister. We highlight the importance of tackling the shadow fleet, and India is a key partner. We're committed to working together across a whole range of issues, and we underline to them how unreliable an energy partner Russia would be. In relation to the tragic forcible deportations of what we believe is almost 20,000 Ukrainian children raised by the member opposite. This is a matter of real concern to me and to the rest of the ministerial team. We're a member of the jointly led Canadian-Ukrainian initiative, along with 28 other states, and we're providing UK funding to support the rehabilitation of children. My very good friend in Glasgow South also had kind comments. I'm not sure if they were intended for Minister Doughty or me, but I will certainly accept them since I am here. He makes very important points about microchips and various other dual-use technologies. In the interest of the time of the House, I'll probably write in further detail, but these are important points and we're taking action with others in order to try to address them. I might finish, if I may, Madam Deputy Speaker, by just addressing the wider point about circumvention. I'm grateful to the House for their support on these issues. I recognise the widespread concern about other countries doing otherwise. We are now sending senior officials to UAE, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Georgia, Armenia, Turkey and Serbia to highlight circumvention risks and offer technical support. We recognise these issues are global in nature, and so we have designated individuals in Belarus, China, Iran, Serbia, Slovakia, Switzerland, Turkey, the Emirates and Uzbekistan, and I will no doubt have another opportunity to update the House on our work in this area in due course. I'd like to thank the House for their support and urging to support the motion.
The question is, as on the order paper, as many are as of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.